Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bipin Kumar. I am a volunteer at the CSPC Program Events Committee. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting virtually and we are all joining from various traditional territories across Turtle Island. I'm joining you today from the Regina, which is the traditional territory of the Cree, Salta, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We recognize the enduring presence and resilience of the Indigenous people across Canada and are grateful for the opportunity to gather and share knowledge on these lands. I invite our attendees to share their own land acknowledgements in the chat as we get started. We are now using Wordly to provide real-time translation for virtual panels. For live captions, click on the Wordly app button on the Zoom screen. For live audio translation in English or French, please click the link that we just dropped in the chat and open it a new tab on your phone or on your system and mute your main Zoom window. We would love your feedback on this accessibility tool. Now I would like to pass on to our moderator for today's panel, Joy Johnson, President and Vice Chancellor for Simon Fraser University. I'll pass it on to you, Johnson.
Thank you so much, Bipin, and thank you for that land acknowledgement. I'm here on Burnaby Mountain at Simon Fraser University, and I'm on the unceded traditional territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Coquitlam, the Squamish, and the Musqueam nations. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This is going to be a great panel. The panel is titled Clean Power, Smart Sovereignty, Driving Canada's Competitive AI Future. And this is really a time for Canada, I must say. It's a moment of a lot of technological and political upheaval. And I think it's time for us all to be thinking carefully about how we're going to build our future. How do we build Canadian infrastructure that safeguards Canadian data while showing that we also can allow researchers and innovators to access the compute power that they need to scale and to grow? There's so many questions for us to consider today. How do we partner across sectors to build AI infrastructure for the benefit of all Canadians? So we've got a fantastic panel today consisting of experts across industry, academia, and they're going to help us answer some of these questions. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So I do have a little bit of housekeeping before we dive in. We're going to host a Q&A with the panelists at the end of today's session. And we're going to be taking the questions through the Zoom Q&A feature. So I encourage you to find that feature at the bottom of your screen. It might be under More. The Zoom Q&A allows for questions also to be upvoted. So if you see a question that you like, please upvote it, and we'll make sure to get to that question. The Zoom chat can be used to communicate with the panelists or to get help with technical issues. But we're only going to be taking questions from the Zoom Q&A. Finally, we're going to be doing 2 polls. The first poll is a demographic poll. We love to learn more about who's signing up for these panels. So I think they'll be posting a poll in the chat, and I encourage all of you to complete the poll. So we're going to dive in. Rather than me giving the bios of all of our wonderful panelists, I'm going to ask each one to introduce themselves and answer the question, what does sustainable sovereign AI mean to you? And I know there might be a little bit of repetition in the answer, so I encourage you all to build off of each other's answers as we go through this first question. So I'm going to call on you in turn, and let's start with you, Jathan. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, my name's Jay Reichel. I'm the COO of Bell AI Fabric, the section of Bell that's responsible for building out sustainable sovereign infrastructure. I think for me, there is a tension between those 2 things that I think we're going to discuss in the panel around how we balance speed and sustainability. And I think a good reminder of that from our Prime Minister in the last couple of days. But we'll discuss more in the panel.
Thank you so much. I'm going to invite Craig, you to introduce yourself and respond to the question as well.
Hi, everyone. Craig Tavares. I'm president and COO of Buzz High Performance Computing. So we own and operate one of the largest sovereign AI clouds in Canada. So if you're training a model, tuning a model, or running inference endpoint, you do it on a platform like ours. And Joy, just to quickly answer your question around sovereign and sustainability, I do believe Canada's AI future will not necessarily be secured by models alone. It be secured by the infrastructure that trains them, the servers, um, that serve them and then protects them, and then really thinking about how we keep all the values here in Canada. But bridging the gap between sustainability and AI using clean energy.
Thanks so much, Craig. Phil, over to you. Come on into the conversation.
Thank you, Joy. Phil Harris. I'm the CEO of Serio. I think I can kind of answer the question in what we do. Serio is a company that has a mission to build the most effective and efficient AI data centers. And to answer your question directly, Joy, I think from our perspective, sovereignty is about two things: control and choice. And part of the control is where do we do things and how do we do things under our terms. And the choice is how do we do them in a way that's most responsible and most applicable to the things that matter to those values that I think Craig was just referring to and Jathan was referring to. So our mission is to help people build the most efficient, agile, and effective data centers that allow us to think about the future as well as the current.
Fantastic. Thank you. We'll be talking more about this as well. Nancy, over to you. Come on into the conversation.
Hi, Joy. Thanks so much. My name is Nancy Ross. I'm the Vice Principal of Research at Queen's University. I'm a public health scientist, but over the last couple of years, our university, together with some partners, a consortium of industry and other universities, have been working on a bid for the Sovereign Compute Infrastructure Program in Canada. So that's been a really interesting time, I think. It's been an example of working together with industry and universities to try to crack the nut of sovereign infrastructure for Canada, actually, which is, I think, a part of the start on sovereignty, right? Like, I don't think we can have the sovereign conversation without thinking about where we've been weak in Canada on the infrastructure side. And then the sustainability piece, it's environmental. We have some comparative advantage on our clean grids, but that's always going to be a continual balance. I think sustainability for me is also on talent. I'm coming from a university, so I think we have to homegrow our talent, keep our talent here for the long run, just so we can build the models, we can run the infrastructure ourselves and be less reliant on others around the world. So the talent piece for me is a really big piece in this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for that. Isn't it amazing how vice presidents' research can learn about so many different areas beyond their own field? So good for you. Fantastic. That's great. Seychelle, come on into the conversation.
Thanks, Joy. I'm Seychelle. I'm the Executive Director of Partnerships at Simon Fraser University, and SFU is also home to the Cedar Supercomputing Center, one of Canada's largest public supercomputers in Canada. And when I think about your question, Joy, around sustainable sovereign AI, just to build on what folks have already said here, it's not only choice and, what are those choices we make to set up sustainable infrastructure, policies, partnerships that gives us control over our futures aligned with Canadian values. I think that those internal choices also need an external recognition as well. So if external countries and institutions aren't also recognizing or even acknowledging our choices as Canadian, how much sovereignty do we have? And I think that's an interesting interplay for us to explore as well.
Thanks, Seychelle. Last but not least, Diego, please.
Thank you, Joy. Very, very nice to be here. I'm actually the outlier of the panel, so I'm not in the AI space. I'm in the energy space. I'm the Chief Development Officer at Corex, where we develop, invest, and own district energy systems. So that's heat networks, or think of heat as a utility. But it's a super interesting conversation because we're seeing more and more that data centers and heat networks go together like a hand in glove to be able to take the waste heat, put it to productive use. We're doing that with SFU at the moment as well. So looking forward to this conversation. For me, sustainability, it's really quite simple. Just what can we do forever? And so for me, when we talk about sustainability, it's not just environmental, which is super important, but it's economical, it's talent. And I actually think sovereignty is sort of part of that, because if we're not sovereign, it's not we doing it forever, it's somebody else stepping in and doing it on our behalf. So to me, sustainability is a very global type of thing to view.
Thanks, Diego. That's fantastic. I already see a few threads that we're going to pick up in the conversation today, and I really want to thank the panelists for joining me. And I've also encouraged the panelists I'm going to be posing some questions, but please, if you want to respond to a question, I haven't called on you, or you want to disagree productively with one of the panelists, please jump in as well. So let me jump into the first question. I think we do recognize, and this might be debatable again, but I'm going to go out there and say that we do have an advantage, both in AI and in clean energy. So the question is, what do we have to do in the next 3 to 5 years to turn that advantage into real sovereign compute capacity? And I'm going to start with you, Phil. What do we have to do?
Well, I think we have to look at history, and when we've ever seen large transformational technology, isn't just technology, but technology advances, where did that really stem from? And ironically, a lot of it stems from government investment, academia's involvement, and a conjunction between private and public. And I think right now, if we look at it from the Canadian perspective, think about where the US government in the 80s and 90s put massive amount of funding in things that ended up being the internet, or ended up being in software environments or hardware environments. And if you look at the companies that really flourished and then controlled the destiny in many areas of technology, it's because there was significant investment. But it wasn't slow-paced programs, it was procurement. People actually bought things. And I think the way that the government, as well as private investment, is encouraged and has the right policy to put investment in is going to be what underpins Canada's ability to take that set of resources. We have both human talent, both natural resources, and our ability to leverage those into a constructive way at a pace that keeps us, quite frankly, where we need to be. And I think that's some of the aspects that we need to be looking at.
Thanks. Jay, do you want to get in on this one?
Yeah, I guess to start with on the energy side, I'm not sure that we do have an advantage in clean energy. We have hydro grids here, but there are very few projects that are going to be built based on that power going forward. And if you talk to those utilities, they will tell you that their own forward-looking predictions say that those grids are effectively tapped out. Now, there's a conversation I think that we should be having there about whether or not we should be exporting some of that energy as cheaply as we do to the United States instead of making some value out of it here. But for the time being, the hydro resources that we have in Canada are effectively off the table for large-scale data center building. I think, it's the same thing with the talent side. I mean, we have a lot of resources there. We've done traditionally in Canada the same thing with the innovation that's happened here as we have with raw materials, right? We dig things up, we grow things, we export those raw materials, and then we buy them back at 10 to 100x, when someone else has captured the value. And I'll just follow on to what Phil is saying. I mean, where I think one of the things that the government has done that's really clever is there's a very influential article in my previous world, around energy transition by a guy named Jeff Curry called The New Dual Order, where he really said that this idea of large scale infrastructure change inside of a society only really happens through the lens of national security. It's when you're being threatened, and that's the reason why all of that money was poured into those government labs is the threat of the Cold War, and some of that innovation was allowed to walk out and start the companies that became the foundation of the internet. I guess one of the other things that I'll say is something that we've been trying to communicate. It's not just a Canadian problem. I think it's a societal problem generally, is we used to just build things without knowing what they were for. We electrified rural grids in Ontario, in the United States, without knowing that people would have microwaves and they'd be plugging in laptops, right? They built and expanded the internet without understanding what the uses were going to be. And I think, there was this idea historically where, people were willing to take a chance and build things without understanding what all the implications and the use cases are going to be, because they understood that the abundance itself creates those use cases. And we've lost our ability to do that at this point, and I think that's holding us back from being able to make some of the changes that we should as quickly as we need to.
Yeah. So build it and they will come kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Craig, do you have anything to add to this one? in terms of
Yeah,
what
I
we
want
need
to
to do?
I want to double down on it because we're living it right now. Again, we're partnered with Bell, actually building out national AI infrastructure today. So really, again, it's that thought process around, I think we are leaders in AI research now. How do we become leaders in AI infrastructure, and building it in tune with the pace the market needs? And that, I think that's a key part there is speed. So, if Canada was able to help build modern AI, and we have the talent, but having that talent is like, without compute, it's kind of like pilots without airports, if you could distill it down to that. So to your question, Joy, like the next 3 to 5 years, we have to be really talking about how we convert our clean energy. But in addition to energy, there's land, there's fiber. Again, there's all the universities, there's public sector demand, and really turn that into a large scale Canadian controlled AI infrastructure. And if you get really prescriptive about this, it's really taking that power and turning it into compute execution, right? So I agree with Jay too that there's not enough energy. And I think when you look at the bottlenecks too, it starts from the ground up. But having energy in the right place, I think is something we don't even really consider sometimes when you have to build AI infrastructure and then you think about the fiber and everything that comes with it. And Canada's clean grid is a strategic advantage, but again, it only matters if, again, you could turn those megawatts into shovel-ready AI campuses. So that's another big thing that we got to get over here in Canada. And for Canada, to really take sovereign compute and turn it into a national priority, the same way we think about ports, rail, telecom, energy, and defense. AI compute it's no longer just a technology input. It's almost like a strategic national asset. So if we could get our heads around that, if we could consider AI being that, again, this dovetails into a lot of what Jay has been saying, right? Then I think we could all really rally behind it. And one of the big points too that I commonly see is Canada does need to use government, and industrial demand as an anchor, right? So again, we're going to get into really talking about, I think, capital as being a large part of what's required. Like, how do you now convert electrons into infrastructure? Well, the big piece that glues this all together is dollars. Like, if we don't have those dollars, then there's not too much we're going to be able to do, regardless of whether you have the resource, the talent pool, or the infrastructure behind it. I think, just really to kind of close this off, like if you think about the AI for all strategy that was just released by the FedGov, it was right to say that sovereignty depends on compute, cloud, connectivity, and talent. I just add one more thing, and I kind of mentioned earlier, again, it's speed, right? Because in AI infrastructure, if you can't build fast enough, you really become dependent by default. And then, this is why, again, we're really focused on building industrial GPU cloud. It's taking all those pieces together, critical pieces to launch something that's compelling in market, but owned by Canadians and operated by Canadians.
Thanks for that, Craig. Seychelle, we've heard about investment. We've heard about pace. And we've heard about concerns about energy, that we have to get that right, and then thinking about compute capacity as a national asset. Anything to add in terms of what we need to do in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think, there's this, and Craig, you talked about this too. It's like, how do we connect the pieces together? So success is enabled by government, by utilities, by industry and academia. And it's not just to, build this critical national AI infrastructure on clean power in a way that benefits communities. I think the other half of it too is, as we close that loop on benefit to community, is also, how do we ensure that this AI infrastructure helps also strengthen our clean energy transition in Canada as well? And I think that's where, it starts to plug into some of the research that's coming out of the post-secondaries and, the companies that are growing in Canada that's supporting that sustainable infrastructure as well. And I think that it's like two halves of the coin to help us really achieve this advantage for Canada.
Teamwork.
Can I just say one thing, Joy? I apologize for interrupting, but there's something I think that there's a thread here that I think that we should also maybe think about. The current approach that the world has taken, and we can take the world as China and the US from an AI perspective, has been to allow a particular set of vendors and suppliers to follow a scale-up model that says actually be damned with resources, be damned with constraints about impact, right? Which is why we're seeing some of the social backlash. I said at the beginning of this, I think sovereignty is as much about control and choice as possible. It's our choice also how we go about doing this. And we shouldn't be bound by the current model that the rest of the world has chosen. By the rest of the world, I mean two superpowers that really don't have the same intrinsic value system or need to adhere to an intrinsic value system that here we have in Canada. And I think that's critical because then we can make different choices. If we simply say we're going to follow the hyperscale model, then we'll follow the hyperscale model and everything that comes along with that. The question is that the choice we should be making?
That's a good point. Yeah, Nancy.
Yeah, if I could just jump in. Like, I think that's a fundamental point, Phil, here. AI has come in, it's changed lots of things worldwide. And just like, electricity and any other sort of massive change, things were problematic at the beginning, right? We didn't get a lot of things right. And then over time, like smart people put up the guardrails and it gets better, right? And so Canada is good at the guardrails. And this is where I hope Canada gets to shine in the next couple of years, where we only do AI infrastructure together with planning for grid, and we do it so that when we get AI, our grids are better, and we make a lot of gains there. We only do this in tandem. We only do it thinking about the sustainability. We only do it from our homegrown talent. Like we have a choice here, and we have the capability, I think, to say some things about AI are not going to be good for society. And some of that is environmental, some of it's ethical. And we have the opportunity to engage multiple sectors in Canadian society, including industry, partnerships, government, the not-for-profit sector, to kind of start earlier on the guardrails for the world, to be frank. But we're going to have to build some infrastructure to do some of that stuff, though, right? Like otherwise, other people are building it. Yeah. So we got to build it. We got to build it well.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I'm going to flip the question just to see if there's anything else to add. And we've talked about what we need in the next 3 to 5 years. What are the barriers? And maybe it's just not having these things that you've listed might be the barriers. But are there any other barriers we need to be thinking about, Diego? Any other concerns you have as we try to think about building this infrastructure? Diego, I can't hear you all of a sudden. And I don't see your mute button up. Oh, try you again. We've got a technical problem there, and I'll let you work on that. And I'm just going to ask the other panelists and pipe in when you can, Diego, once we get this fixed.
Yeah, I think I can jump in.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there is one of the things that we have to overcome is what does sustainability mean as far as grid infrastructure goes, right? Yeah. There is a real misunderstanding around how grids work, their dynamics, and I think the way that we measure sustainability and people understand impact in that space is incomplete. The fact is the largest decarbonization that has ever happened in the history of the world was the 1970s when France moved from coal to nuclear.
Yeah.
And there is this fundamental misunderstanding, I think, among a lot of people around the role that solar and wind especially can play in the future grid, the limitations of intermittent renewables, right, as a part of having a performant, abundant grid of the future. And I think you've started to see that in the grid issues that Spain is having and California is having and Germany is having, right, where they retired their nuclear fleet and now last year they were burning lignite coal, which is like the dirty coal from a Charles Dickens novel, to try and maintain grid stability. And so part of that is just the way that we look at those things doesn't account for the full life cycle. We don't ask people to do a calculation around amortization of embedded carbon or amortization on energy invested. And I think the crux of that is there's like a vestigial issue that needs to be solved around the way that we price energy, because we allow basically a solar developer to get the same energy car price for what they produce, even though that energy has a cost to the rest of the grid as far as resiliency and performance. And so that's something that we'll need to solve going forward, because we do have a lot of grids in Canada that are just sort of broken. And I think the only real prospect of fixing that is nuclear. And that's definitely one of the things that I think these projects can help with, is be the justification for people to move there faster.
Yeah.
That's
Now,
right,
Can
Kevin.
you hear me
Yeah.
now? Am I back on?
yes, you're back on. Let's
Okay,
go to you,
wonderful.
Diego.
Okay. Um, so maybe I'll actually just riff a little bit off what Jay said, and I'm going to go back to an earlier point Jay made about there being no more hydro capacity. I don't think that's quite right. So I live here in Vancouver, British Columbia. We're just about to turn on, or have turned on, Site C Dam for about 3.5 gigawatts. Revelstoke Dam is getting another turbine put in for another 500 megawatts. I think they've announced that they're looking at Site D and Site E. So there is some more capacity that's coming in with hydro. I don't think it's going to be the silver bullet that saves everything. So I agree with your point, Jay. That's not going to be the solution to it all. But I think that if we look at what we have today, we have some of the cheapest, greenest, most reliable power in the world, at least in BC or Quebec or Manitoba. And then you go look at Ontario, I think that the CANDU reactor there has done great things for us. I agree with you that nuclear needs to play a big role going forward. I don't know why there's so much reservation around nuclear, other than economically, sometimes it's not great, but I think we we have the right type of off-taker, that starts to make a lot more sense. And the other thing that Jay said that I'll just say it slightly differently is one of the biggest carbon reductions, not in Europe, but in Canada, that we ever saw was going from coal to natural gas. And so people have villainized natural gas as part of this transition, but I think we've seen our Prime Minister Carney actually start to change the tune there and recognize that we are going to need some natural gas if we have any hope at having a reliable, affordable grid and support AI. So I think that as we look forward, I do think that we have a lot of advantages here. I think we've got to be pragmatic and get away from the sort of ideological sustainability lens that I think we've had the last half a decade. Jay's exactly right. Solar and wind, I think they can be good supplements, but there's no way that that is going to be driving our grid by themselves. And I think the biggest thing we can be doing, and I was very optimistic to see it written down, we'll see if we move forward, is east to west interties and transmission, so we can have more connectivity between the provinces rather than just south north the way we have it right now. So I'm cautiously optimistic we're going in the right direction. And maybe just to end my soliloquy here, the thing that I really struggle with, and I don't know the answer, and love to hear from others, is I hear from a lot of people here, and I agree that government's got a role in helping us unlock sovereign AI. And I agree with that on even energy infrastructure. I think government's got a big role on helping coordination so we can be smarter of where we put our capital and infrastructure. But I think Canada's biggest issue, as well, is we have too many guardrails and government gets a bit too involved. And as private sector trying to put money to work, there is more red tape doing business in Canada than anywhere else I've done business. And so had we both lean on government to help facilitate this big transition we have to make, while at the same time making it efficient and not having too much red tape, I don't know the answer, but I'd love to hear from the others.
I mean, just to riff off the soliloquy thing, and what was going through my head was tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps on its petty pace. I think that's Macbeth. I think that the thing about that is, yeah, we'll have small modular reactors in Ontario in 15 years. We'll have lots of capacity built out. It's going to take time. The question is, between now and then, what do we do as an industry and as a population, as a country, to allow us to stay where we need to be in what is an arms race, using the available resources as they come online and the available technology to best use the energy of and if we had endless supplies of energy, would we still be as profligate in how we use that energy as, say, for example, China is in building out their AI infrastructure? And the answer has to be no. Mm-hmm. The answer isn't, do we have enough energy? We will have enough energy in time. The question is, how efficient and how effective is the use of that energy? And should we start that today or wait until we have the abundance of energy that may come down the road in the next 10, 15 years? And of course, the answer is we have to start now.
Yeah. So what about the question? I think Diego's point is really interesting. I mean, on the one hand, we're all applauding the investment the federal government's making in sovereign AI, but he's also saying with that comes some red tape. Is that, how are we going to manage that? Because there is a speed question, I think, that we're all talking about as well. How do we go as quickly as we can?
Yeah. Joy, I mean, one thing I could add to this is, again, just having lived through this for my entire career and it exacerbated now by trying to build AI infrastructure. There are really basic things that we don't talk about. One is taxation. and incentives. So developing infrastructure here in Canada is super expensive.
Yeah.
I don't think we do enough to really incentivize the growth outside of, some subsidies and programs and grants. And those are great because, again, we look at infrastructure, I mean, across different layers. One is the talent pool, the other one is the, software applications. And if you go further down to the compute itself and buying chips to provide that compute to Canada, that's great. We've actually created programs around it. Building based infrastructure now, like to stand up power infrastructure, stand up again the substations to really build again the shell and the data center itself. Yeah, the tax piece there is incredibly prohibitive. So I think again there's disconnects across government, like outside of even, and this may roll into policy a little bit, but yeah, there are disconnects across different layers of government, whether it's Fed, provincial, or municipal. And that quickly gets you into the other bottleneck, which is permitting. So let's say you figure out and you absorb the tax piece, you figure out how to pull the capital in. Well, how do I move a permit along fast enough so I could go build? And that is a red tape piece that I think the panel's talking about. Phil, again, you said it well, right? Like we just need to get out of our own way. And I think if you make this again a federal priority and it's a national strategy to go build this infrastructure, well, how do you now educate and bring everybody else along for the ride? Um, the last part I'll probably talk about, again, we keep talking about it too, is around procurement speed, right? So government can be one of the most powerful anchors in the country, but it only if it buys at the speed of the market. So from an AI strategy perspective, I think Canada's already said it'll accelerate federal AI procurement through the Office of Digital Transformation, and use the government as a strategic anchor for the customer alongside the Buy Canada policy. So that needs to become real, right? And long-term sovereign compute contracts like clear security standards and Canadian data requirements and procurement pathways that don't take years. I think that's the most important piece to that. So like if you could unblock those, I think you have a really straight path forward. And the barrier is not that Canada lacks ambition. The barrier is that AI infrastructure requires everything to move together. It's power, capital, fiber, procurement, policy, and talent. And the market moves in quarters. So infrastructure often moves in years, unfortunately, and that's the gap that Canada has to close.
Thanks for that, Craig. The other thing that's been on my mind is the pushback from the public as well, with a sense. And I think that's the other piece that we're going to have to think about is how to bring the public along to understand the importance of sovereign compute capacity in Canada. I certainly hear from people concerned about energy consumption, et cetera, et cetera. So there's work to be done as well as because if the government starts to sense any kind of backlash, they might go a little bit cold on us. So we need to keep pushing forward on that front as well.
We've already seen a project shut down in Hamilton, in Ontario. And we've obviously seen what happened in Vancouver recently with TELUS's announcement. So yes, I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done.
It's a great role for universities, I have to say. So that's fantastic. Okay, I'm going to switch gear and I'm going to talk a little bit. This has been raised, the issue of collaboration. And the question is, what are the biggest opportunities? It seems like this is going to need to be a team sport, but what are the biggest opportunities for collaboration across government, industry, utilities, post-secondary institutions? And Nancy, I'll start with you and then move to Seychelles.
Sure. I mean, I feel like university sector is just at the ready, like it's never been in terms of Team Canada, maybe. Then and many institutions are like this across the country. So we see tremendous potential on dual use technologies that will require a supercomputer. Like I think what Jay was saying earlier about the use cases, the university's got them, right? We've got the use cases in material science and genomics, in energy. And like there's a huge demand there, and the bigger scale problems are in industry. And so you put those two things together, and I would say, that's where all the magic will happen, because a really, really good investment in supercomputing right now will bring people together around an all-purpose coping tool for our problems, both in the university sector and in industry. And I see the willingness around the country to work together on problem solving like never before.
Yeah.
And so I hope we can capitalize on that moment to bring our best expertise together and build out also the demand side on the industry, which requires some more education, I would say, and more training in the industrial sector from universities or from elsewhere to make sure we can keep the demand side up to be competitive globally here in Canada. So I'd say there's partnerships on the talent development side, on the problem solving side. I think we're lacking. We have a GPU shortage we have to solve. We have to solve it sustainably. It's tall order, but I think we can do it in Canada. We're in a better position than other places to like address that tall order. And I would say there's that willingness to make sure folks don't just access GPUs, but they access all kinds of talent also in universities. There's a lot of engineering talent. There's a lot of scientific talent in universities, and together with the GPUs, that's where you make really good insights come, right?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. I think that's such a good point. It's not just about the infrastructure; it's about the brains that can now help us, make the most of it. So, and the talent that's going to be required. Seychelle, do you have any thoughts, other thoughts on collaboration and how we can, what kind of collaborations will work in this space? What are the challenges?
I mean, I think our strongest opportunity here is really the public-private partnerships that are needed, to be able to drive sustainable AI national infrastructure, both for scale and for sovereignty. And to Nancy's point, Nancy, I totally agree with you. This has to be a team sport. It needs to be able to leverage everyone's capacities and expertise and mandates if we're going to solve this hard problem for Canada. And I think in doing so, it creates a model that bridges not only, capital and speed to deployment and, our public mandates and new technology development and all of that, but it really creates a foundation where Canada can increase its competitiveness and drive innovation, not just domestically, but globally. And I think that's where the universities have a really interesting role to play as part of this economic engine. I think the universities get a lot of credit for the talent they produce, and absolutely rightfully so. But I think there's also a large amount of work that also happens between the universities and industry as well, where we're able to advance these sustainable technologies. So I think of like a company like Ballard, for example. So they're this major fuel cell company, and they've used, for example, both SFU's 4D Labs, which is our 85 million advanced materials facility, and our supercomputing center as well. And that's been able to drive development of new fuel cell technology that is powering buses that are in communities as well. So I think about those use cases of not only, collaboratively building the infrastructure together, but leveraging the wraparound supports that the university provides to be able to help industry become more competitive and more innovative for the Canadian economy as well.
Thanks. Phil, anything to add on this?
I was just thinking Seychelle's points and how to sort of frame them from the perspective I was thinking. I think if we look at Canada, we have something on the order of something like 380 to 400 data centers, depending on how you count. You look at the states, there's something about 6,000 data centers. So you just prorate that by the population. We're about half the capacity. But if you looked at the scale and size of the data centers in the US versus the scale and size of the data centers we hear in Canada, the math goes very wonky. So this is why I think so. By the way, Jay and Craig, I think what you guys are doing is so exciting because by definition, Bell is a distributed infrastructure model. And I think the way we will both leverage AI and make it available to more people is not to create these large, as I said right at the beginning, these like hyperscale type designs. We need to distribute it more. Your question about the relationship with academia, for example, is a good one. If we think about the national labs in the US again, the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense, the big supercompute labs, those are funded by government in hand with universities. Those super labs are always by a big university. They're never just stuck in the middle of nowhere. So Texas A&M, for example, around Stanford, around Harvard, around Ann Arbor, right, Michigan, where you find the national labs is where you find universities. And there's a direct correlation between those things. We need to look at that part of the model and say that works. Now, then the question becomes, how do we do that at a scale which enables us to do this, which is socially responsible, sustainable, and acceptable? And how can we then get that into, Jay, you said something very interesting at the beginning about the internet when it was rolled out. We kind of built it and we hoped they would come. Actually, I was part of the group that built out the internet and most of the rest of the world outside of the first world nations. And that's where economic growth actually happened. That's where we saw small companies form, small, medium business companies formed in. I remember putting in the first exchange point into Bhutan, of all places, where we literally took the routers up on the back of mules. No joke. That stimulated an economy. It stimulated social growth. So I think the question is, if we can do this in a distributed fashion, not a scale up model, but a scale out model, we will see that economic growth and we will see that opportunity develop.
Such an interesting point, scale out instead of scale up. Jay, I saw you nodding your head. Do you agree?
I mean, I might need a definition around those things, but you know, I agree with your points. I think well made.
Yeah. I think the other thing, that occurs to me when I listen to Nancy and Seychelles, and this is as a university president, I think it's also time for the universities to also collaborate more. And I'm seeing that more and more as well. I mean, I think we've often been in competitive mode, but we're just not big enough in Canada to really meet all the need. And there's so much more we can do together if we partner with industry, but also partner with other post-secondary institutions. And it can make a huge difference because the need is going to be so great. And I see that happening. And I think the question is, how do we keep that going? I certainly know in the province of British Columbia is an expectation from our province that we find ways to partner together in new ways, which I think is exciting. Anything else to say on collaboration? What makes the magic?
Yeah, I just think Bell AI Fabric deserves some credit. They're doing something important for Canada. It's turning national connectivity and infrastructure into national capacity and capability. And same thing for SFU and Queens. Again, I think some of the first to show that universities should not just train AI talent, but they should help operate infrastructure and backbone of Canadian innovation. So no, I just wanted to at least present that because there's some profound things that are being done to market today.
Yeah. That's why we've got all of you on this panel, because you're all doing some of that work, which is fantastic. And I think the challenge in front of us, as we've talked about, is speed and scale. How do we keep this thing going? So here's the downer question. What do we risk if we can't, where will Canada be, and what do we risk if we can't move as quickly as we'd all like? What can we expect, and what will happen to Canada if we can't? Any doomsday thoughts for anybody?
Well, can I just have this, like, the university's perspective on this? I think we give up Nobel Prizes. We give up our place in the global order of discovery and science and life science. So I think we give that up if we don't solve this soon.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think part of the reason why I moved to Bell was that I think it became obvious to me that Canada needs this infrastructure more than other countries. Again, we've got a relatively small population.
Yeah.
It's a large area. We have a national value of providing a high level of services to citizens, and that those services, for the most part, require fixed, high capital, infrastructure that has a limited draw area. We have a lot of traditional industries that need to be transitioned. And so, I do think, when you take a look at demographics, when you take a look at aging infrastructure here, specifically, when you take a look at the industry transitions that need to happen, that, we have more at risk than other countries not doing this well, not just okay at it, but really taking advantage of the transformational possibility. Because I don't really know of anything else that can close the gap. Otherwise, if someone finds a genie lamp, and until we find that other option, I think we need to be better at this than other people, because there is just this sort of inevitability of the widening gulf between our national aspirations and our economic reality.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we confront that often enough, because it is scary to think about. But I think the work we're doing here is a part of solving it.
Yeah, Jay, one of the things we had talked about, previous to this panel was also, some of the biggest critical issues that we're facing in Canada are, the state of our healthcare system, the state of our infrastructure, et cetera. We're not going to get out of this problem by just continuing to do what we're doing. We need something to kind of move us forward in a different way. And you were suggesting AI might be just that, what we need for Canada. And if we don't, all of our other assets are also in danger, I'd say.
Yeah, people don't care about the environment when they don't have jobs, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think the other complication for Canada is, I mean, we've been talking about a bunch of things here around why why it's difficult to build here, why it's difficult to get investment, right? Why it's hard to get permits. And I think a big part of that is the fundamental problem that underlies why we as a species have been unable to deal with the things that are confronting us now, which is that we no longer feel a responsibility to one another or to our countries, really, right? We're radically individualistic for the most part, right? And we cannot come together to deal with things in the commons. And I'm glad that I'm not the one that has to make this decision, but there is going to have to be a reset at some point between how loud and how long, right, we let the voices that hold up things that are going to be for the good of all of us, versus the collective good. And I think, that needed to be rebalanced, but I think that it probably needs to be balanced again. So
Well, I just riff off something Jay just said, because I think this is so critical to your, not doomsday, but the reality of this situation we're in right now. Go back to the Treaty of Rome after the Second World War. That was because they recognized, as Europe came back together, if we didn't have that social cohesion through economic growth, or social cohesion would be fractured without that economic growth, that we would lead ourselves back into another world war. That was why the Treaty of Rome happened. And to put a real sort of, not doomsday, but sort of a very sort of sharp point on this, the social cohesion, that yes, we may be a small population, but it's a growing population with a higher dependency on a safety net in terms of healthcare and in terms of other services. And to Jay's point, that has to become more available and more cost effective and more easily distributed. And I think that the social cohesion of a country that does live on a basis of values will only exist if we have that economic growth, that technology, if it's managed correctly, deployed correctly, can provide. And it really comes down to social cohesion, or the lack thereof.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I know we lost Nancy, but I know she's back, and I'm just going to ask if people on the science policy team, there she is. She's pinned again. There we are. Good to have you back.
It was so weird. It like took me out somewhere and brought me back.
The ghosts. We've got about 10 more minutes for questions. And I guess the next few I'm going to ask everyone to lean in on. And this is the Canadian Science Policy Conference Group. And I just want to ask the question about policy. What kind of policy change do you think we need in Canada to have the greatest long-term impact? What kind of policy do we need in place? And I'll go around the table. Diego, I haven't heard from you for a few minutes, so I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, where my head goes to, we need integrated resource planning. And so one of the challenges that we see in the infrastructure space today is that natural gas utilities focus on natural gas demands, electricity utilities focus on electricity demands, heat utilities like ourselves focus on that. And we don't do a great job of looking across the different sectors and coupling them. But if we were to do that, the amount of synergy and efficiency that we can unlock and making our dollars go further in infrastructure is astronomical. But it's really hard to do that from a pure private sector perspective. That's where I think that government does need to lean into policy and have coordination there so that infrastructure views beyond just their own discipline.
That's great. Is any country getting it right now, Diego, in terms of planning?
The European, no, I'm not a huge fan of European energy policy almost universally. I think it's pretty bad, but I think in this front, they do a pretty good job. And just an example from, I don't know, about a year ago, Meta or Facebook, they were trying to build a big giant data center and they actually got rejected because they weren't next to a heat network where the government said, if you want to go build a 200 megawatt data center, you've got to be able to take that waste product of heat and reuse it. So something along those lines, I think would be very beneficial out in Canada.
And a big shout out to Corix because you're helping us reuse our heat from the supercomputer at
That's right.
Simon Fraser University. Fantastic.
Thank you. But how do we do that at scale?
That's the
universally?
question, right?
Yeah.
That's the question.
And I get you're not going to do that in the middle of nowhere in a hyperscaler, but there are plenty of opportunities where urban data centers exist and buildings exist beside them where we can use electrons twice.
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, policy, other policies you think we need. Nancy, any thoughts?
So we'll see, because the fall, how this all shakes out in terms of, building a supercomputer for Canada. There may be new policy around this entity. We'll see. That might be interesting. But it's hard to say because we don't know yet.
Mhm.
But I think there's a whole bunch of policies around privacy, data, ethics that are probably going to have to be built out. I think like our health data, for example, there's going to be policy changes in order to make them useful for us going forward, to help improve the lives of Canadians, to help improve our healthcare systems. So there's a whole bunch of policy development that's going to be required on the data side, I would say, to make AI easier to use and protect people's privacy and so on. I think those challenges are real. And then and some maybe policy alignment on our values and the type of frontier models that get built. Right. I don't even know what that looks like, to be honest. I don't know if that's going to be policed or policy, but it seems like there might be some statements that are going to be required or around that. And I think, and I think we'll see what the next few months bring in terms of policy needed for some immediacy here.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think someone mentioned that in Canada we are interested in these guardrails, and I don't think we have them from a policy standpoint kind of constructed at this point. Other ideas on policies, panelists? Go to you, Phil.
Stimulate private sector investment as well as public sector investment.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that we don't have the equivalent to Sand Hill Road in Palo Alto, where you can't trip over 10 feet without falling into a venture capital company that is funding a lot of infrastructure development right now across the board. We don't have a policy that really instills confidence or incentive in venture capital funding. We don't really have that same venture capital mindset in Canada that we need. There's pockets of it in places, but it's not as ubiquitous, and we need that. And that will come from tax incentives, that will come from other forms of government willing to allow venture capital to come in and fund a lot of this work that will need to be, because we need more Canadian companies. For every 5 Canadian startups, 3 go to the US in some way or another. 1 survives, maybe, and and the others don't.
Yeah.
Right. And that's because of the lack of VC bedrock funding in this country, which we need.
Yeah, fantastic. Craig, anything else to add?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think again, and this panel's done a really good job sort of describing the different facets, but again, it's actually pulling all those facets together. So we need a coordinated federal, provincial, municipal framework that combines one path to success. And that's really like a national sovereign compute policy. If I'm building AI infrastructure, it's a national priority. Let's remove all the roadblocks around that. And that means fast tracking permitting, interconnections for those qualified sovereign AI infrastructure projects, long-term government and industrial offtake contracts for Canadian controlled compute. And then if you think about the Buy Canada sovereign compute requirement, like, how do you invoke that immediately and really recognize again the sovereign players in Canada so that we can charge them with being able to deliver on that? And it's a reserve capacity for universities, researchers, SMEs. We talked about healthcare, there's defense, and all the Canadian AI companies. And I mean, this really again just goes back to what you're saying earlier, Joy. Like the risk is that not that really Canadians stop inventing. It's a risk that others commercialize control what Canadians invent.
Yeah.
So I think you have to distill it, and then it just goes back to GDP. Like, what is that going to do to GDP if we don't, again, make these things happen?
Such a good point. Seychelle?
I mean, I completely agree with Craig that there does need to be this like integration of policy at all 3 levels of government. And I think it's not only to the national benefit, which will have this great impact, but I think that there's also, alongside a policy harmonization, there's also a piece around how do you even just navigate the bureaucracies among all 3 governments as well, so that we can, move at speed and be able to create this impact too. So I think it's as much of a policy question as it is a process question as well.
Mhm. Jathan, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing we're talking about here is that there's some system thinking that's
Yeah.
involved, right? Like these things have effect on one another, and there's a step order in some cases to the goods that we need to do in order to get the outcome that we want. I will say, fellow, happy to debate this over a beer sometime, but I personally think venture capital is a terrible way of commercializing technology. And there's no way that we're going to be able to compete there. Good companies are easily able to find funding at this point. For me, the real issue is that it's very difficult for those technologies to get commercialized. They don't end up doing the good that they are supposed to. It's very difficult for companies to, operationalize them, to take these things that venture capital has kept separate, even though in some cases they represent only a partial improvement on, some part of a system, and then put all those things together and scale them up. It's one of those things I think that a lot of people that have been doing this for a while know is, a lot of the use cases that we're talking about here could have done them 10, 15 years ago when we were calling this machine learning. But the fundamental problem here, it's not a technology one in most cases. It's what networking we would call a layer 8 problem, right? It's human beings, it's regulatory environments, right? Those are the things that are preventing companies from, pushing forward and in some cases being able to connect, the things that matter to them, and then have the output of whatever that model is, touch critical infrastructure in a way that is actually going to have some of the good I think we're hoping is going to happen here. And a part of that is just a general trust idea, right? And that I think needs to come from government, both as an adopter and by doing wide scale, policy change.
I agree with you, Jay, but let me just say one thing before we get that beer. I do think that the reality is, let's assume that government is largely responsible for all the big build up, right? At one level or another. I'm not suggesting you're saying that by itself, but let's just say that for a second. And we did see that with the internet scale out in the early days, which is why Al Gore gets the bad press he does for when he defunded the NSF and made it a commercial problem for the internet. What happened afterwards was all the technology that was evolving because of the internet then became through venture capital funding, not or forms of private investment. And I think the question becomes, what's that balance? And right now, all I'm saying is, I think that the government investment policies around venture capital needs to be addressed, so we've got the right taxation policy to foment that activity the best we can, because that still plays an important part of the overall picture.
Yeah, I think we might be close to agreeing there, because I think for me the issue is the big lie of venture capital is the original return profiles that were reported by those Sandhill Road companies did not account for the billions of dollars that had been spent in those military and national labs.
Absolutely.
It was allowed to walk out the door, and they captured that latent value as a return that people have been expecting ever since. And that's a lie, right? And so the real thing that happened there is that there was fundamental investment, right, on a massive level that happened inside of fundamental science and in those national labs. And that for me that's the gap. If we do that,
we're on the same page. That
yeah,
still has
then
to happen.
we're-
I think we've all been saying
Yes.
that. I think that has to happen. I mean, Oracle wouldn't be Oracle without the CIA. HP wouldn't be HP without
Yeah.
the Department of Energy.
Yes.
You can go through the list.
Well, I certainly hope that there are some government officials paying attention to these policy recommendations, because it just occurs to me, just looking at the most recent AI, policy, that we're not hitting some of these targets right now, and there's a lot of work to be done, both by federal, provincial, and municipal governments to get this right. A lot of work ahead. I am noticing that it's almost top of the hour, and I promised that we'd start the Q&A at top of the hour. I've got a few more questions in my little on my list here, but I'm going to encourage those who are joining us today to post their questions in the chat. And we do have one question right now, and it's from Omer. And it's, thanks for the excellent discussion. Always like that. Curious to hear the panel's thoughts on current and future demand for AI compute in Canada. What's your sense of demand? And who would like to start with that one?
I have a very technical answer to that. So today, what we're trying to build are AI gigafactories, which means that we can build out and support over 100,000 GPUs. What what I've seen in the market right now is a deficit just from some of the research institutes of 200,000 GPUs in the next 12 to 18 months. So, we're trying to build at this massive scale, but still there will be a shortfall of compute requirements. Uh, another interesting example too is, and I see this all the time when we're interviewing and talking to folks to bring into Buzz, and typically these are AI researchers or engineers, and it used to be the case where, again, I've been in tech in Canada for over 20 years. It used to be the case where, again, typically you'd start around talking about the role and job, and then that quickly went into compensation. The first question someone asks me now is, how many GPUs do you guys have? And if you're an AI researcher, again, it's so critical because guess what? You can't do AI research without GPUs. But to answer the question very directly is, yeah, just from a domestic perspective, we know, I think that we'll probably be 75 to 80% below where the target could be. And that's why, again, we just need the speed and scale to move in the sort of desired route it is.
I understood the question to be maybe meaning something else, though. I thought the question was, what will be the consumption points of AI? Meaning, why will people care? What will people really look to AI to solve in their day-to-day lives? What problems will we be asked to solve? That was my read of the question. Anyway, maybe I misread the question. And I think the real question is, we don't know. I think people think about AI on the one hand as being a scary thing from science fiction stories that they should all be terrified about. On the other hand, does it help me when I can't get a general practitioner or a family doctor to do basic medical home medicine, for example? Can it help me with certain things in my life when I'm doing my taxes? Can it help me when the things I do in a day-to-day life? I think that was the actual point of the question was, how do we think AI will develop as a resource and how will it be consumed?
Yeah, I certainly see a lot of frivolous use of it. Shopping lists.
It was the beginning of the internet too, by the way. The internet was largely funded on very somewhat frivolous, and we can use terms for that.
But that's how people learn, right? That's how they learn. Yeah, interesting. Josh has a question here that he's just posted. We've long been witnessing a rapid increase in both the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events across Canada, whether it be wildfires or wild-scale floods. How much of a priority is climate resilient design in the build-out of AI infrastructure? Climate resilient design. Is that on people's minds these days, Craig?
No, actually, Canada has a very favorable climate because when we're building AI data centers, we have a natural cooling effect based on our yearly average climate. So I'm very happy to say that we use a lot of free air cooling to cool these GPU clusters and all the compute technology. And it again, when you look at other markets or other countries where, again, you have a higher average temperature, you're not able to leverage that cool air 80-90% of the year. So your cost of cooling the data center goes up dramatically. And then you get into other things like having to use water as part of the cooling process. In Canada, we don't use any water to cool our data centers.
Yeah, but I think the other question related to this is, other disasters, earthquakes, fires, etc. Are we future-proofing these?
Yeah, you wouldn't build a data center if it's it's an area that's exposed to.
Yeah, we like bedrock.
Yeah,
we like bedrock. Yeah.
Yeah, but maybe I'll add in if I
the early energy question. I mean, I'm in Ottawa right now where we've been getting rolling brownouts through the heat wave, where the domestic supply of energy is still fragmented and fractured. So I think you're right, Craig. I think there are ways of just avoiding the sort of the big landslide problem. But I think the general question is, are we building to exacerbate the problem or to circumvent the problem?
Yeah,
Well,
and there's grid balancing sort of strategies that you'd use in a market, especially when you have peak demand throughout the year and looking at the curve of any kind of climate impact. So if again you're in a constrained energy market, typically what you want to do is form again curtailment strategies with the grid itself, right? And that's a very common thing that we'll see in market these days. And I'm sure Diego will have a lot to say about that.
I always have a lot to say about that, but I just the one point that I would say, I see it more from the infrastructure side than the actual data centers itself. Last few years, during COVID especially, everybody was focusing on decarbonization and preventing more fossil fuels or emissions going to the environment. And there's been a very big shift, I think, in where the interests are, which is shifting towards climate resiliency rather than climate prevention. For better or worse, I think a lot of people have come to the conclusion the climate is changing, and we're not going to today or tomorrow do anything to stop it. Whether you like it or not, I think with AI coming forward and all the power that's needed for that, it's becoming very obvious. But the big shift is how do we become resilient so that if we have these flood events or fire events or storm events that we can persist. So we are seeing a big shift there in the upstream infrastructure. I can't speak for the data center themselves, but we're seeing a lot more dollars go towards climate resiliency rather than climate mitigation.
Thank you. We have another question here, and it's, I would love to listen to the panelists' view on the nation level plan for AI, enhancing productivity to be globally competitive. AI is about speed, and we Canadian are not known for the implementation at speed. We've talked a little bit about this. This is from Tabrez. Anyone want to lean in on this one? How are we going to move as quickly as we need to move? We've talked a little bit about that. Any other thoughts on that? I'm going to have to pin someone on this one. Phil, any ideas?
I think that a lot of the questions about integrated policy. I think a lot of questions about how we ensure that we have the right scissors going through the red tape where we need it. I think one of the things that actually a very interesting thing is, do all the Canadian consumers of technology know about all the Canadian technology? I run a very small technology company. It costs us a lot of money to build technology. We spend most of our time thinking of engineering, not of marketing, quite frankly. Are we making sure that we really know about all the resources we have in Canada that we can take advantage of, and take advantage of them with priority if they are fit for purpose? And making sure that that is a well understood set of resources. I get to talk to a lot of people at Queen's and Nancy and the team there, and Simon Fraser University. I'm beginning to talk to the guys at Bell, but this is a very hard road for most technology companies. So how do we make that easier?
Yeah.
And
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Joy.
No, you go, Diego.
Sure. I was just going to say, taking a step back, something that Jay said earlier in the conversation about there needs to be education on sustainability and what it means. And I think he was exactly right about that. But I actually think that we need some education on what productivity means, because us Canadians, we love our social goods. We love public health care, but we can't afford them. We're pretty close to being broke, and we've had no productivity gains in about a decade. And so I think it's becoming a fundamental need to become more productive, because just opening up the immigration floodgates for GDP growth has come to an end. So we need to do something. And I think at some point this is going to become desperation, and hopefully that induces change, because I think there's a bit of ignorance of what it takes to have the Canadian values we want, while still saying no to any major projects and putting red tape up.
Yeah, it's a good point. Nancy, I think you were trying to get in on this as well.
I would say, like, modern R&D is going to be digital, and R&D, when it's really good in an economy, is what gets you productivity gains. That's sort of fundamental. So we do need supercomputing capability and capacity in order to get the R&D, the digital R&D done in Canada. I think that now what we get out of that, like the absolute gain, really hard to predict, but we know we get some benefit from building, and then most of the benefit is downstream, quite a long time away from the R&D benefits that come through digital R&D that you do with a supercomputer. So the models around the world are quite heady on this. We'll see empirically in Canada what happens, but I don't know how to do R&D anymore without digital support.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I think that this is also an opportunity for us in Canada to really, we're talking about AI right now, and what we'll do on AI is connecting a series of systems and partnerships together. So there's our infrastructure layer, there's our energy layer, there's our SME layer, and then there's an innovation ecosystem wrapped around that. And I think in creating those connections together, it will position us to be more globally competitive because we're now thinking about it as a system, not as individual pieces. And that we could then replicate into other areas as well for the country. And I think AI is going to be, the one that'll help Canada really figure this out and figure out our trailblazing here so that
Yes.
we can be set up to do this again. And then the next time, close that loop on productivity and competitiveness much faster.
Yeah. This next question coming from Anonymous is, we've kind of talked about it, but I think it's interesting the way it's framed. How should Canada coordinate AI infrastructure planning with nuclear new build, grid expansion, Indigenous consultation? That's an interesting element we haven't talked about. Clean power procurement so that AI growth does not outpace the energy system. Does anyone want to? There's the area of Indigenous consultation is obviously going to be important in terms of building any of these projects, particularly around the energy systems as well. Anyone want to tackle that one?
Could speak to it at high level. So one, in most provinces, we are actually building frameworks around this, so it is happening today. In Ontario, for example, there was Bill 40 that was just passed, and it was around how, one, in the short term, we manage grid power availability, and then building a framework around it. So again, we're not putting a data center arbitrarily in some place where it can't support it, but it's in the right place, and there's mechanisms around the power consumption. And I spoke to this earlier around, power grid balancing and grid curtailment. So that's again, does the data center have a way to offload from the grid should we have peak demand and there's not enough energy at peak points in the summertime? But when you look at the infrastructure planning around now energy itself, there's generation, right? So this is what we talk about nuclear, but there's also transmission. So there's really two facets to this as well, and lots of dollars involved in both. So yeah, I want to say that again, the frameworks are being developed, and there is some policy. Where we got to be careful again is what we come back to all the time is like not overburdening it with too much policy where we completely stop. Indigenous consultation, I could tell you again, yeah, we as a company actually put that as part of our guiding principles, and we part of our mandate when we go build a new project. And then for clean power procurement, I mean, we spoke about this too. I think Jay called this out. Phil spoke to this a little bit in Diego, but the grid is one of a hybrid grid. So it's not to say that there's just one single solution today that's going to provide all the power we need, but it's a combination of different power sources. So whether it's nuclear plus gas plus solar and wind, we've found ways to kind of combine so that we can provide capacity today. In the future, maybe, you shift to more nuclear, but again, it's going to be a long transition. And gas has been a reasonable transition because, again, you need what we call baseload generation capacity. That means power has to stay on 24/7. Not to say, though, you need it all the time, because, again, when you have solar strategies and wind to complement that, then yes, now you're using, again, different ways to generate electricity, renewable, clean ways to generate electricity to complement whatever is there.
Thank you for that. That's great. And
Yeah,
go
sorry.
Go ahead.
I can speak to some of the work that we're doing with First Nations. I mean, there is an ongoing conversation around a framework I think that needs to be built around what First Nation sovereignty looks like and what it looks like to have nation-to-nation sovereignty. And I think one of the things that people are just starting to realize is, when they talk about nation-to-nation, that doesn't necessarily mean the nation to Canada. We talk a lot about the possibility of Canada being other countries' sovereign second home. And I think I can see a lot of First Nations. There's conversations at the AFN level where, people are starting to think about the unique role that they can have in sort of being data stewards. I also, we have some fundamental partnerships around the data centers that we're building. So the project in Regina with George Gordon and others to be announced. But I want to call it one nation in particular. They're quite small. They're in northern Ontario. They're called Wabigoon Lake. And that is the place where the nuclear geological reserve is being built, right, is on their traditional territory in partnership with them. And, they have had a hard conversation internally around, trying to get their folks to understand how that's going to benefit them. And the position that they have there is that, they want to be the ones that are pushing forward and actually make it so that we can do things faster that are necessary for the country. They want to use the advantages that they have around regulatory frameworks, right, and their ability to apply pressure in different ways, and the commitments that we've made to economic reconciliation to do things, for their nation, but also for Canada. And I think that that's the growing sentiment there that I wish that more Canadians understood, right? Is that part of how this might end up getting done as quickly as we need to, is by working, more closely with our First Nations partners. So
that's a great example. Thanks for that, Jay. That's great. Last question from our participants today that are online. This is from Selma, and it's really circling back to the reception of the data centers in Vancouver and the public concern. Is this a signal that there's a need for advanced environmental assessments for these projects and/or better science communication and enhancing the awareness of Canadians on how the projects are approved? Are we doing the work we need to do, I guess? And is there more work to be done on this? Who would like to take that one? Yeah, Diego.
I'll start off with something that might be slightly provocative, but I believe that no amount of environmental assessment is going to have the people with the pitchforks not protesting. So I think there's a big job we have to do in communications and education, but I don't think that the answer is more environmental assessment or more red tape.
Yeah, thanks for that. Anyone disagree or want to add to that in terms of the need? I certainly think that we need to help the public understand the importance of this infrastructure from a sovereign perspective, but also from a perspective in terms of the future of Canada's economic growth.
Yeah, I mean, am I allowed to respond to this one? Is that
Yeah, please do.
I mean, I will say that I think that it's an odd place to build a data center, so good luck to them.
Yeah.
But I think, Diego, you're exactly right? Like, people aren't mad at the data center. They're mad because they feel like the social contract is broken and they can't see a future for themselves and their family. And this is a tangible thing that they can attach all of that anger and that anxiety to, right? That they can throw stones at and show up with a sign. And I think, again, it's a sign of these underlying societal issues, right? And this is the thing that they're coalescing around. But they themselves, I don't think, are the cause.
Yes, I do think so, though, that folks don't necessarily see themselves benefiting from AI immediately, and they get worried. I think they're not sure that there'll be carbon reporting. They're not sure how the water will be used, even though, it's about the same amount of water as a typical office building for some of these builds, or many of these builds. So I think I kind of agree with Joy here that we've got to keep talking about what these really are and how, and we probably can't make all the claims about what it's going to mean to them personally, but we certainly need to be in the game as a nation in terms of our future discovery and innovation. I think it's clear, but we can also do a bit better job of describing what these are and saying maybe, Canada is not going to compete in the global race of hyperscalers. We're going to do things differently here. And we are going to be, reporting on the carbon footprints here very carefully. We are going to be building very carefully. We are going to focus on innovation and discovery here for a lot of our public infrastructure. So I think we can be a bit better at telling that story.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. We've just got 5 minutes or so left, and I'm going to ask a final question here, and that is crystal ball time. 5 years from now, what would you really like to see in 5 years in terms of that would indicate that we've got this right? What would you like to see? Seychelle, what would you like to see 5 years from now?
5 years from now, I think if we did this right, we would build not only, national critical AI infrastructure and also a sustainable circular economic engine that's connected to the communities we serve. So if we look at our, the stack of partnerships, that we have, government, industry, academia, SMEs, and more, we'll be able to help support our researchers to develop, new, more sustainable technologies. We'll be able to help Canadian companies across the supply chain be able to develop technologies and get to market faster using national AI infrastructure, and work to, capture the heat that will then help support our local communities to heat their homes and heat university campuses as well. So that's, I think, what success looks like for me. It's the infrastructure is part of it, but it's also changing the system around it so that we're making a difference for our communities and our economy at the same time.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Seychelle. Great answer. Phil, what would you like to see in 5 years' time, realistically?
That's not a very long event horizon.
No, it's not. That's right.
So I'm going to make it even shorter. In 3.5 years, which I think is going to be the run-up to the next general election, assuming that people go to the full term of the electoral cycle, the politicians are going into the next election cycle with a serious discussion around how they are going to make sure that AI is a value proposition for the Canadian population, and what they're going to do with solid policies to enable that, with solid policies and direction and strategies will enable that. Because until we get that as being something that people see as value, it's this conversations like this which are great, and those of us inside the sausage making factory understand all of this stuff. But how do we get the population? Because otherwise, it's the pitchforks that Diego was referring to. It's a social contract that will dissolve or never be established. So, who's going to take the mantle of establishing that social contract? And that's a shorter run, I think, than 5 years. But I try to answer your question without answering, I guess.
Yeah, no, that was good. I liked it. I'll go to you, Craig. 5 years, or 3.5.
No, it's actually interesting because what I think about is, again, our previous generations were building railroads and the energy grid and roads, and this next generation needs to build something new, and it is that AI infrastructure. And if you think about a hospital and a school, how important that is, like this needs to be put in the same class as that, right? It's critical infrastructure. Seychelle just kind of mentioned that too in what she was describing. So like 5 years from now, I think we'll know if we got this right, if Canadian researchers and startups and enterprises, like all the universities, the hospitals, can access secure compute and secure Canadian control compute at that, right? So again, that's essentially mitigating them and us from sending our valuable data and IP and workloads offshore. So I think success means Canada is not just an AI talent exporter or cloud consumer. It means Canada becomes a trusted global platform for clean, sovereign, and production-grade AI infrastructure. So yeah, hopefully that's something that we realize really quickly.
Thank you for that. Nancy, anything to add?
Yeah, I was just hoping in 5 years that Canada has a global reputation, not only for their AI research and AI talent, but also some impressive public infrastructure and it has created alongside that investment in public infrastructure an innovation ecosystem that's really impressive and is globally competitive.
That's great. Diego?
I have two answers. The first answer is that in 5 years, I would like to see Argentina have 2 more World Cups.
You can dream.
We didn't check your maths possibility. I guess it could be done, but you still got Egypt.
And then the other one, I would love to see us trade more electrons with ourselves and with our neighbors to the south.
Okay, excellent. Jay, final word to you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that we've talked about here, but specifically, I'll call out a couple things. The development of a national grid strategy in a real way, I think, is something that needs to happen. I think, a real conversation around the lack of connectivity that is here, is something that we need to do within the next 5 years. But yeah, personally, I'm really excited about the project that we're a part of with Queens and SFU, and I think there is the real possibility there that what is currently conceived is going to be sort of a watershed moment for Canada, and that people are going to look back as as the sort of launch of that compute system as being the thing that sort of changed the trajectory here. So it's been a lot of work to get that done. And so I'll say that's one of those things I think that I'd love to look back at and see in 5 years. Right.
Thanks for that. Listen, this has been a fantastic panel. I want to thank all of you. I've learned a lot. It's really been a very insightful panel. I think there have been a lot of suggestions, particularly on the policy front, what has to happen in order for us to seize this moment, meet this moment. And I'm really hoping our colleagues at the Canadian Center or the Canadian Science Policy Center are taking notes as they think about ways that they might engage government on this subject in more detail. It would have been great to have government representatives on this panel, to have them kind of be part of this conversation, because that's the other thing I'm hearing. Universities, industry, but also government need to be part of this discussion. So I want to thank all of you for joining me today, the panelists. Really very, very grateful. Let's give them a virtual hand. Thank you very much. And I also want to thank our colleagues at the Canadian Science Policy Centre for the work they do behind the scenes to get us all organized. Deeply appreciate that as well. You'll see there was a poll, I think, to get your feedback, and they're always interested in hearing from you. And so with that, I will close us off for the day and just say, have a good afternoon, everyone. It's really been a pleasure. Take care.